Hello, so I'm going to start showing you how to import a picture and then modify it and just kind of walk you around Lightroom a little bit. So you can see some remnants of stuff I was doing before, but we're just going to start from the beginning. This area over here shows your catalog with folders in it. Don't worry about that, we're just going to do a regular import, and I'm just going to import that one picture that I sent you. And so you can navigate through all the files that you have. I keep all my pictures on a second disk, but the picture that I'm going to show you I saved on the desktop. I'm just going to show you, navigate, oops, and here is, oops, oh, it's not showing up because it thinks it may be a duplicate. So we're going to check this one. And I'm going to uncheck these. You can, obviously, when you have a lot, you can check or uncheck all. So we're just going to import that. And we're going to click on Import. Up here you have the option to pre-render previews so that when you're working on it and you zoom in, it doesn't take that time to load at that time, like a more detailed view. So if you're only going to mess with one picture, do it up front. If you're going to mess with a lot of pictures, set a one-to-one preview and walk away and get a cup of coffee because it'll take a while. So I'm going to import that picture. If I'd imported a lot of pictures, you'd see them all in here. You saw a quick status up here. This computer has a lot of horsepower and it's one picture, so it didn't take long. You may experience different amounts of delay. So the library view is mostly for setting a lot of attributes to a lot of pictures, setting keywords, making changes to some of the metadata. I don't really do a lot of that. Maybe in the future, maybe if I was categorizing a ton of different types of pictures, but I strictly use Lightroom for modifying the pictures, so I don't care about how well it can index and retrieve them later. I use a pretty normal folder view for that. So I don't need the advanced functions on this. So the next module over, we're in Library, and we're going to go to Develop. This is where you actually have the options to make a lot of changes. Here you can see this overlay. I believe I set that in View Options, and I did. So if you want this overlay, you can choose a bunch of common fields of information that you may want overlaid on it. That way you can see if you're making changes to one, you may need or want to make proportional changes to other. Or if you're doing a screencast demo like this, you can demonstrate to people the type of settings that you're working with. When I'm not hovered over it, you can actually see a lot of those same settings over here: ISO, focal length, aperture, and shutter speed. But we have them mirrored up here as well. If you want, there are a lot of presets that you can apply to this picture, and you can expand these and hover over it, and you can see a quick view in the thumbnail in the upper left hand corner. I personally haven't messed with these a lot. I'm sure they work great. You can set collections, so if you're scrolling through a large folder view full of pictures, you can rank them in terms of stars. You can flag them as ones that you definitely don't want, ones that you definitely do want, and so on. And then you can later filter based on those. So you can say flagged one way or another, stars, rated or unrated, and you can just play with those and see how that goes. I have a dual monitor set up. I don't know if you see these options or not. You can work in two monitors at once. I haven't really done that. I'm using a full HD monitor. It gives me plenty of real estate. Yours is too, so I don't think you'll have any problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of walk through some of these settings, and then we'll actually apply some of them as we go. So this picture in RAW, it doesn't actually embed, it doesn't make final decisions like a JPEG does. So if you take a picture with it and save it as a JPEG, it automatically encodes that white balance. It automatically sets the exposure value that it's truly taken at, and it de-blurs it. Well, it doesn't de-blur it. It sharpens it, and it takes applies noise reduction and a variety of other functions, and sharpening, contrast and so on. So you have a lot of flexibility with RAW because those aren't kind of baked into the file. So we're going to make some changes. With the white balance, I know what it was shot at, but right now it's showing you as shot, which means nothing applied. It's just kind of a dull picture. So you can step through a lot of these settings which equate to a color temperature, and you can read more about those, but each light source has a temperature, and so it has a color cast to it. You can also adjust the tint to make up for any weird variations in there. With any function inside Lightroom, if there's a slider, you can grab that slider and move it, or you can actually drag it over the number itself. You see those arrows left and right? So if you click and then move left or right, those change. You can kind of do finer controls or wider controls. The good thing is you're not limited to the mouse being on the screen, so you can just kind of move that however you want. So I'm going to say it was on as shot, and we're going to step to auto, and it's going to make a guess, and to me that's way too dark and really doesn't reflect the scene as it actually was. So I believe it was in daylight, and that looks better. And then so what may have happened is it wasn't exposed properly. So I'm just going to click auto, and it's going to make some guesses at what the exposure should have been. If you notice up here, the histogram is shifted pretty far to the left. So on the left is your blacks, shadows, kind of exposure midtones, highlights, and then like the whites. I don't know that much about the histogram, but if it's all shifted to the left, that means it's pretty dark. So I'm actually just going to click auto, and okay, that looks pretty bright. So I have toyed with it more, and if you look and like kind of on her cheeks a little bit and some parts of her shirt, and if there was more lighter color things, they may be a bit overexposed. So the really bright or hot spots, as some you may hear people say, are controlled by the highlights. So this is the detail recovery. I think I told you before, you know, if there's 100 shades of white that a JPEG can represent, there may be 1,000,000 shades of white that are actually possible with a greater color depth. And so those 100 shades of white don't do justice to the true color range that can exist. And since it records that entire color range, you can draw detail out by toning down some of those whites or whatever else. So I'm going to try and bring down some of those highlights, and you see it's hard to tell, and you got to kind of watch for it because it's not a huge change. I'm sliding it left right now, and it kind of brings down some of those really bright spots, but they're not overwhelmingly bright. So I'm going to bring that back to -2, which it had already set it to. Shadows will it's on the opposite end. So those darks that aren't real substantive, they're just kind of on the fringes. So if you bring the darks down, it brings it slightly darker in the shadowy areas. If you bring that up, you can recover detail in areas that have shadows. So again, just like white doesn't have a huge depth of color shades, same thing with the dark areas. So I'm leaving it at +12 right now, and you can see over here in the history, any changes I'm making, it tells you what they are, and if you hover over it, you can see in the thumbnail image in the upper left hand corner what it would look like if those were undone. It also tells you what changes you made. So I added +10 to the shadow, which brought it to 12. So you can actually just click and it will undo that. Whites will have a much greater visible effect. You can see that's going to get dark. It'll also kind of make the image more gray, and you can bring that all the way up, and you can see that greatly overexposes it. So again, if you don't remember what you went back to or what that setting was before, you can just look over here. I bumped it up 92 points to 99, and I'm just going to step that back, and the same effect will happen with blacks. The presence, I did some reading on that, and the clarity is, these are finer controls, so you can actually play with them. One professional photographer I saw, he was just constantly clarity. He would bring it up to about a 12, which it's different than sharpening. it just adds, like, I guess a little bit of, it's hard to describe, I'm not sure. And the same thing with vibrance, bring that up to about 8 or 10 somewhere. Saturation, you will see a very great variance in color if you mess with the saturation a lot. So if you want to bump some of the colors, bump them a little bit, but don't go too crazy on it. With the tone curve, you can read more about it, but a relatively pleasing look to pictures will have kind of an S shape, meaning that it bumps the whites out to the left and blacks out to the right. You can set that yourself by pulling on parts of this, or you can use the sliders, or you can use a very basic preset here and kind of tweak it from there. So I'm going to click this onto a medium contrast, and you'll see that really darkened up some of the picture. And so I'm actually, I think I'm going to boost some of the shadowy areas and just kind of bring back some of that detail. You may see that in the trees over here, so it's not too crazy. So I'm going to bring it back down. I don't mess with hue, saturation, and luminance, so we're just going to skip that. Split toning, you read about that a little bit before. I don't mess with that in here too much, so I'm just going to leave that collapsed. The detail view, this is giving you a one-to-one view. So right now this image is much greater than the display size right here, and it's set to fit to this screen size. You can also set it to fill the screen. We've zoomed in a little bit. You can click a one-to-one zoom, which is 100% native resolution, or you can set a variety of other scales. So this little loop view right here is at 100% so that you can see it easily. And if you want to set a point, let me go back to the fit screen. If you just click this little icon right here and say, I want to see her eyes, just give it a click, and then it'll hold it right there. So I'm going to go to a 1/2 view right here, because we're going to do some sharpening. If you just pull on these sliders, it's sometimes difficult to tell what's actually happening, even with a one-to-one view. And I watched a video the other day where it was describing, if you click and move this, you're actually seeing changes, but it's really not that apparent. So if you click that, or if you hold Alt, and you can see these buttons change, meaning I'm pressing down Alt. So I'm going to hold that down, and then click on this slider. It's all white, meaning that any sharpening is going to apply anywhere that there's white. So white everywhere means it's going to sharpen everything equally. Now as I move that to the right, it's masking, meaning it's finding less and less smooth type areas to sharpen, and now it's finding more of the edges. So right now you don't want to sharpen somebody's face so much as you want maybe around their eyes. You want to sharpen the edges of this wheel, or kind of physical things in the scene, not necessarily skin. So you can bring this up very high because you don't really want to sharpen skin at all. And I'm going to go to a one-to-one view here, and let's click that again, and you can bring this up to 100, and even that wouldn't be too much, but I'm going to bring it back just a little bit. And then so that's set at 95, and you can increase the amount of sharpening. I'm still holding down Alt, and you can, especially at that one-to-one view, you can see how extreme that sharpening can get, even with the masking. So I'm going to leave that kind of low. I'll leave that at 36. The radius, I pretty much leave that alone because I don't know about how much that does. Luminance, again, if you hold Alt, it turns it gray, which I don't necessarily see how that's beneficial to me. So it started out at 0. I haven't made any changes. So for the luminance, I don't know that much about the noise reduction, but at one-to-one right here, especially with daylight, low ISO, there's not a lot of issues. So you can do some. I'll bump it to, let's say, 30. And you can change some of these detail tabs. I found the default most of the time is pretty good. Don't over noise reduce because you'll turn somebody into looking like putty. So let's say I crank that all the way up, and it doesn't really look that realistic anymore. You can do it if you need to, but I don't need to. From what I've read, you can really bring up the color noise reduction, and it doesn't have a lot of effect. It just brings out tones in color, which is okay. Here in the lens correction, I know on my so yes, your camera will have it if you're using the T2i. If you have a JPEG, it will correct for it if you've set those settings in the camera. But you can also, if it's shooting RAW, it doesn't make those changes, so you need to enable profile corrections for the lens. And I'm going to go back to fit view so you can watch. So with this lens, with most lenses, you'll either get a barrel or pin cushion effect, and you'll have a little bit of light fall off around the edges. But it's mathematically known exactly how much that will affect each image at whatever focal length, and so it can account for that. So if you watch, the outside edges will get just a tiny bit lighter, and you may see a distortion in the middle, but it's really just flattening it. So we're just going to click enable, and it looks like it brought the middle out a little bit, and it lightened up the edges. So I'll undo it, and I'll redo it. So if you made changes before and you liked how dark it was around the edges, you may have actually just undone that. And of course you can control how much you're going to control that. So if I like the vignetting, I'm not going to apply that effect at all, and I'm going to bring down the outside, but I'm going to leave that at 100. You can also just click in there and type the value that you want and hit enter. This auto-detected the lens that I was using. It should do the same for you. If not, you may need to import a signature or just look up what that signature may be. And I believe that you can also save those as well, so you don't have to do it each time. I'm not doing any effects. I'm not going to add grain to it or anything. And you can also change the color profile. I would recommend you do some reading on that. I typically will leave it on Adobe Standard. So you'd asked before, I'm going to go to a one-to-one view. So here's what it looks like now. If you hover over any tools, you can usually get a shortcut. So if I press D, which I'm already on it, it's the loop view. Here you have a number of before and after options for viewing, and pressing Y will bring you to whichever one you selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click it. And here's the before and after, but it's side by side. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to go for the split. Now, you may notice that the lines don't line up exactly right, and part of that is because of the center distortion from the lens. So when you corrected it, it actually slightly shifted that image a little bit. You can also split top and bottom next to each other, and split it down the middle that way. So I'm going to go back to the split, and just as an example, I'm just going to press D, and you're back here. I'm going to go back to fit, and if you wanted, so if you take a picture of a kid, you don't necessarily want a picture of the kid with 800 pounds of playground around them. You want a picture of the kid. So you have a crop option, so you're going to click that once, and it's going to scroll back up on the right. You're now in the crop tool options. So it's asking you, what do you want for that aspect ratio? Right now it's original. This picture was taken in a 3:2 aspect ratio. You can also set one. So typically if I'm going to send somebody a crop picture, I'll send it to them in a 5:7, assuming that they're going to print it. So I'm going to click 5:7. And you can see this shaded area or lit area is that 5:7 aspect ratio. So I'm going to bring that down. And this is confusing a little bit. You don't move the window here, you move the picture to the window. So I'm going to click and bring to the left, and it's actually, that box is staying in place, and it's moving the image behind it around. So this is in the landscape view, but let's say I want it in a portrait view. So I'm going to click and bring it over, but bring the mouse up as well, and it will kick it over, and now you're in the portrait view. I'm going to bring that down, and it won't let you bring it past the very bottom edge here. And shift it over just a little bit, and if you hit done, you've now cropped that image. Well, okay, maybe I didn't want to crop it like that. If you go back to crop, that whole image is still there, and you can change the aspect ratio if you want. You can shift the angle if you need to correct for it a little bit, and it shows you exactly what it is here, and you can also see what changes you made and undo that. So I like this one, so I'm going to say done. Now you need to actually export this because you've made a lot of changes, but you don't have a product to work with. You don't have a picture that you can send to somebody. So we're going to right click on this, and I'm going to say export. And I'm going to the ... meaning I'm going to get some options here. So we're going to export to the hard drive. I'm going to say export to the same folder as the original photo, and previously I say put it in a subfolder called corrected. So I'll have a folder where I put all the raw pictures, and then any exported JPEGs, I'm just going to say they're in a folder called corrected. I'm not going to make any new file names. The file settings, I usually put it at a 90. You can change the output format if you want. You can say limit to a file size, so if you want to leave it at a megabyte or less, you can. You can resize the image if you want to. You can choose megapixels, dimensions, and if you're going to resize it, I prefer doing a long edge or short edge size and keep it proportional rather than setting dimensions, because you may distort it, or it just may not be what you're expecting it to be. I've already sharpened it, so I'm not doing anything. I'm not adding any metadata. I'm not adding any watermarks. And so I'm just going to hit export. And you'll see a status bar up there. Again, I'm only doing one, and this computer's pretty beefy, so it knocked it out. I'm going to leave the viewing area for a second, and I'm going to bring that picture up. And I'm opening the picture in a different window. And you can see here, I'm going to resize this so you can see it, and here it is. Here's that picture, and I'm going to see if I can get it to view. There we go. So here's that picture we just exported. So it's cropped, it's in a 5:7 format. I'm going to bring up the properties here. So because of the image resolution, it's in the 5:7 format, but it's not the size of 5:7, but it's the appropriate thing, I assure you. If you click on the EXIF info, we're going to bring this up, and it still has all of the data that was normally associated with that image. You can also see that it was edited in Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. If you want, you can strip all that out, but I'm not too concerned about that right now. There's nothing in there that I care about. And so that's pretty much it. If you in all these options will be saved within Lightroom itself, so you can go back and adjust these, because if you retain that raw file, you can undo or redo or make as many changes as you want. Let's say I have all these changes to it and I want to export this, but let's say I want that landscape view too. Well, I can go back and recrop it and then export that one also. Or you can right click on it, and I'm going to create a virtual copy. And it just shifted everything over, I think. There we go. So if you hover over it, this is 1 of 2. This is 2 of 2. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to change the crop, still 5:7, and I'm going to pull to distort that ratio. I'm going to bring this up here, and maybe I want kind of a tight one up here, and we'll keep her shifted off to the side. I'll match that edge up over here because we don't care about that wood. Now it's just her hanging over the edge. And I'll hit done. So here's this image. And if I export this, right click, export, and if you liked all the settings that you'd set on the last export, you can just say export with previous. Oop, that actually overwrote the other one. Well, alright, so I'm going to export. Export that. And then choose options for exporting this. Sure. Okay. So here they are. And if I bring that up and go to image 2, all the same settings are applied. You can go and change the settings as well, but you get two different pictures out of it. So you lose nothing. You can do whatever you want. And if you look before, remember all these colors were shifted basically to the left-hand side of the screen. Got a much lighter, I think better developed picture here. And that's it. Enjoy.